to lead us into a dialogue on sustainable energy, which is one of the key elements of Thailand's future. But before we get into that, I'd like to give you a little background on our center. And we have monthly talks, luncheon meeting talks, every third Thursday of the month under Net Impact and SESM, and in collaboration with Sasin Alumni Association, where we feature a speaker who can give us a view into sustainable business and related matters. Last week we had Kun Soni, the VP from Interface Carpet, come and give us a really great presentation. And we actually have a trip, which we organize every month also. We have a trip to the Interface Carpet Factory in Amata Nakhon next month on the 17th of December, so please join us if you have time. We also feature film screening and networking nights. And so this month we have the great opportunity to turn the networking night, usually in a really informal setting at the Roadhouse Barbecue in Surawong, to this panel discussion on energy. And I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Dr. Piyasawat Amranan, the chairman of PTT and former energy minister. And secondly, Dr. Twarat Sutabut, Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy. We also have Kun Jane Namchaisari, the Vice Chairman of the Federation of Thai Industries, and also Peter Dupont, Vice President in Government Services and International Development from Nexont Asia. Our moderator today will be our Chief of Operations at SCSM, Kun Alex Mavro. So please give a warm welcome to all our panelists and moderators.
Evening. You've really got a powerful panel of experts here today, so I hope you're ready. Hold on to your seats and hold on to your hats, because I think you're going to be surprised by some of the revelations you hear today. And make notes and ask some good questions, because these people have the answers for you. To begin with, we're going to start with Dr. Tawarat Sutabud, and he's going to give us a bit of an overview and background with his own perspective on the energy situation here in Thailand.
Sawadee krab, ขอบคุณครับคุณ Alex ครับ I walk around. I feel like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg now. But anyway, it is my pleasure. I thanks again for Sasin for inviting me to give a few talks and make my comments. I've been here a few times. I've been invited by a few of my good colleagues from Sasin and also Sika to present my points about the energy policy in Thailand. People talk about energy policy in many shapes and forms. Well, I only give you my 7 slides presentation just to update about fact and figure. I would give you about the status quo, about energy situations in Thailand, and then I brief a bit about policy, but I would leave that alone because we have a good gentleman up on the stage that would probably present some more ideas, and then I guess it might be a good idea to listen to you guys. What would you recommend to us? What the energy policy of Thailand would look like? So that's my intention of coming here. Okay. Well, first, Thailand is a growing country. We're still hungry for developments and hungry for energy, definitely. We are growing for more than a decade. Okay. Even though that we have a plans and intention to decouple the growth of the economic expansion to decoupling from the energy needs, but it would take quite some time to restructure our manufacturing structure, because Thailand has transformed itself from agriculture country into more like a real a manufacturing country in the past few years. Okay. So you would see that we need some support, and we need a good plans and good policy looking forward to make sure that the supply would be secure and energy demand has been kept in check. That is our intention. And how to keep demand kept in check, there are various policy and measures to do that. Energy efficiency, pricing signals, and others. Okay. My second point is Thailand is importing everything. This is not strange. I do believe that Saudi Arabia and other countries have some sort of a sub-importation of their energy resources as well, but in different categories of energy resources and in different scales. At the moment, Thailand imported energy, primary energy, at least 50% to 60% of our primary energy needs. And in all form of those primary resources are imported, including natural gas. Natural gas, the importation is standing at 20%. Petroleum like oil, importation accounting for more than 80%. Coal and lignite, the importation is more than some 70%. Even hydropower, the importation is 47%. Okay. So the issue is how could we make sure that the importation could be kept in check and could be reduced if possible. This is our main challenges for Thailand for the past few decades. The importations, as I mentioned to you, the importation is approximately 57%, but it varies from years to years. That you would see that we have, at least we are lucky enough to have some deposit of our own energy resources. We have some oil resources, even though it's small. We're lucky enough to have natural gas to make sure that it could be added value, to make sure that it could be security for our power generations and value added for petrochemicals industry. But how lucky Thailand is? Well, at least we found the resources and we be able to bring it up and add more value, create jobs, and help elevate our technology platform. You would see that many chemical engineering in Thailand right now is more than, it's totally different today from 25 years ago when we start our Eastern Seaboard project. Chemical engineer at that time rarely knows things about high-end petrochemical and polymers engineering. But at the moment, Thailand has one of the world-class, or at least the leading institutions about chemical engineering in ASEAN and in Asia. So I would say we are lucky enough to have our own resources, to add value, to secure our supply, and help develop the country. But again, the big challenges of reducing importation is still there. But the lucky games of domestic resources seems to have short life. We already reached our peak. I guess you already know about our peak oil concept. We have been peak, or we have been at the plateau of our peak production for the past 2 years. The good thing is we produce a lot, but the bad thing is we cannot produce more than this. This is the level. If we're not finding another uh, uh, deposits, or if there is no new area for exploration, there is no chance that we could increase our productions. Okay. So the reserve to production ratio, which is the indicator that measures how long the proven reserve of each country would be, keep reducing. And the proven reserve of P1 to the current production ratio stand at 7 years. Okay. So the number of 7 years has been, disclosed in many newspapers that Thailand would run out of their own gas and oil and gas resources within 7 years. This is actually, we would run out of our proven reserve. Okay. So there are some risks. As I mentioned, that we are at the peak production, we are peak oil and peak gas. So the idea is, how could we extend this peak, or have at least a chance to have opportunity to find new resources. Okay. So my message is, to slow this trend, you need some activities. Okay. Either upgrading your own production now, upgrading the efficiency of the productions, or you have to find a new acreage and new production activities. Okay. I mentioned this because there's a good plot made by the IEA and released first probably about a year ago. It's plotting the oil importations against the gas importation of almost every country in the world, okay, including 7 ASEAN member countries. Okay. ASEAN as a whole actually is the net oil importer, but is the net gas exporter. Borneo Island alone, which shared by the 3 countries, Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia, used to accounting for more than 80% of LNG export, but not anymore, and because Qatar and recently the United States found shale gas and take a lot of growth potential of LNG export from Borneo Island. Okay. So ASEAN used to be, in the second quadrant, but it probably in the next 30 years, 20 years, it would move to the levels of it has to import oil and gas in the future. But look at us, Thailand. The blue dot is 2011. You would see that we are in the first quadrant already, meaning that we import both oil and gas, but we would probably import more than 90% of both oil and gas by the year 2015. By 2035, sorry. So the challenge could not be met with the business as usual. Okay. So there something need to be done. Okay. So the policy of the Ministry of Energy at the moment focus on four streams. Okay. This is going to be my last slide, but I live there because I would like to rejuvenate what would be your comments. Okay. The 4 stream would include to make sure that we have adequate supply of energy resources flow into our system. Okay. Secondly, we make sure that when we have a good supply, we can extract the most variable parts of those molecules or those electrons to make sure that it could create jobs and create economic expansions. Okay. Third, to make sure that we regulate and send a good pricing signals, to be fair, to make sure that it would be sustained, not too cheap, not too expensive. Okay. And fourth, last but not least, to make sure that the developments of energy and energy-related industry could be in line with the Sustainability Development Index and could be friendly with the environmental and social issues. Those are 4 policy framework that the Ministry of Energy is working right now. I stop here. I would not go more into details, but I will leave it to you guys. Probably if there's comments after this or discussions, I myself and even all my bosses at the ministry would be more than welcome to discuss with all your gentlemen and gentle ladies. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you very much. Excellent, excellent. I didn't give each individual's title because it was in the schedule, but I should point out for the benefit of the students that Dr. Tawarat is the Deputy Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Energy, and that, in the Thai context, makes him one of the highest-ranking civil servants, actually the second highest-ranking civil servant within that ministry. So he knows very much wherever he speaks. And now we're happy to have with us Dr. Piyasawat Amranan, and he is, whoops, he's ready to go. He's going to be very provocative. He was provocative in giving us a summary of his talk, so I think we'll be very interested in hearing what he has to say. Dr. Piyasawat.
Thank you. Actually, my 10-minute presentation could be done in 1 second. It's on there. That's solar farm. So that is my conclusion. Anyway, I believe that the future is with renewable energy and energy efficiency. We are running out of natural gas. Natural gas is the biggest fuel we are using. 45% of our commercial energy is natural gas. 68% of energy for power generation is natural gas. And the reserve is declining. We are not Saudi Arabia of the East. Even if there is more E&P, you will not be able to live on natural gas forever. Unfortunately, not as some NGOs believe that natural gas come from magma. So we need to rely more on other things. And I believe that with coal-fired power plant facing a lot of opposition, nuclear, you can't even talk about without being hit in your head. You need to look at two other things, renewable energy and energy efficiency. In the case of Thailand, I think there is a lot more room for energy efficiency, despite the fact that we had done quite a lot. We had implemented a number of programs which had been successful, by the way. Soft loans for energy efficiency projects, 80-20 project grant, ESCO Venture Capital Fund, the SM bidding. We had tried all these and they had been successful, but unfortunately they had all been terminated. While projects which had not been terminated are moving very slowly, and what I have particularly in mind is the minimum efficiency standards. We can do a lot by imposing minimum efficiency standards on appliances and buildings, but the problem is with the process of issuing the standards. On the table there is the standard drawn up for building, the building codes. It's been 7 years now, and it hasn't been implemented yet because of the problem with the law. You can easily reduce energy consumption in new buildings by 50% using existing technology compared with the existing buildings you have in Bangkok, and that is substantial decline. And all you need to do, I think, would be now to change a small amendment in the Energy Conservation Act will be able to do that for you. Renewable energy, again, we had been quite successful. Actually, we are probably #1 in ASEAN as far as renewable energy is concerned, both in biofuels and also renewable energy for power generation. We had seen enormous growth in the use of renewable energy in SPP, supplying power to the grid, and we are using up nearly everything, biogas, biogas, paddy husk, wood chips, and so on. But there is a limited supply of these, and the biggest potential, I believe, is solar energy. There is no limit for that. There is still a lot more potential for wind energy, particularly in the northeast, and there is also a lot of potential for municipal waste where we are not converting them into energy as much as we should have done. The cost has declined tremendously. Renewable energy is no longer expensive. For example, solar energy is now, I believe, more or less competitive with avoided cost of the system, which is imported LNG. But the main problem with renewable energy is the various rules and regulations imposed by the government. Pricing incentive is there, not so bad, despite the fact that we had completely forgotten the concept of avoided cost. I think avoided cost should be brought back or use that with conjunction with competitive bidding. But the non-price obstacles are still there, which had not been removed. The government had done away with the problem with the Factory Act, but there are still a lot of problems, I think, still within the ministry. For example, your target, which had become a quota, is ridiculous. It hasn't gone away. And rather than getting rid of some of the committees, you had set up more committees to process renewable energy. Solar rooftop. Now I have solar rooftop on my house. It's still illegal because I still haven't got permit for synchronization after nearly 1.5 years. But anyway, I'll see what MEA will do with me for illegal sale of power during the daytime. So there is a lot more the government can do, and I believe that you can still see a lot more solar energy in Thailand with the current cost. Lastly, let me just say that the biggest impediment at the moment is the pricing policy. Highly distorted pricing policy. We had never seen this distortion in Thai history. Very high gasoline, gasohol prices, because they are using to subsidize LPG and CNG. The blue bar is the retail price in gasoline equivalents. The red bar is the opportunity cost. As you can see, the opportunity cost of the country is a lot lower for gasoline and gasohol, whereas NGV and LPG, it's the other way around. And that also doesn't help with energy efficiency or renewable energy. Gasoline sale had been stagnant for 10 years. Obviously, that it prohibits the use of more ethanol in gasohol. And who in his right mind would invest in CBG, compressed biogas, when we have a lot of biogas being produced at the moment? A lot of waste is still lying around. If NGV is so heavily subsidized by PTT as it is at the moment, so by allowing prices to reflect the true cost, you will see more renewable energy. You will see a lot more energy efficiency in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see. So you have the solution, and he is the solution. Is that correct? The minister. Okay. Excellent. Well, for our third speaker, we have Jain Namchai Siri, and he will give us some particular insights from a unique perspective that he has. Jain Cup.
Well, good evening. I'm from the user side, demand side of energy, and I'm serving currently as a vice chairman of the Federation of Thai Industries. We have about 8,000 members. A few of them large energy user, and a few of them also large energy producers. Obviously, right now we have a number of concerns as we are approaching the peak of our production of energy in the country, and we don't know whether the policy about buying or purchasing energy from neighboring country can be long-lasting and can be very secure. So we have a number of concerns, and these concerns are expressed in the vision for energy reform. First of all, we look for energy security, because without security, your forced to buy at any price. One good example is in a few years back, about 10 years back, we had a drought, and during that time the Eastern Seaboard, the Maptaput petrochemical complex was heavily affected by the drought, and at that time they have to buy water at exorbitant price. You know, one truck of water may cost about 10,000 baht or something like that, which is ridiculous. It would be the same with energy, with electricity or oil or gas or whatever, if we don't have security. That's why we would like to see security. We'd like to see appropriate proportions of fuels. We'd like to see clean and efficient power plants, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair to the country and to the communities where the power plants are situated. And also we'd like to see sufficient capacity for economic growth. Dr. Tawarat had mentioned that we're still a growing economy, so we need capacity to allow for that growth. Even though we are going through, of course, the industry restructuring, we probably try to look for less energy intensive industry, but still a number of strategic upstream industry, for example, like the upstream steel industry, still requires quite a lot of energy to produce. So we need sufficient capacity for the economic growth as well. Second, now I'm trying to rank all these by priorities. The second is the price transparency, because energy is one of the factor for production. It's one of our raw material, for example. So price transparency to reflect the efficient production cost. According to the cost is fine, but it has to be efficient as well. And it has to reflect a fully competitive market without distortion by hidden agenda or financial or political benefits. If we are talking about the Nayobai Prachaniyom, populist policy, that is something that I also call for political benefits. We don't like to see that. We're not asking for a subsidy on energy, even though it's it could be one of our major cost components in our business. The third is the fair choice for consumers, because I believe that in the open economy we should have a choice, and choice leads to competition and also to efficiencies. So we'd like to see that there's no monopoly either by the government or the private sector. Any natural monopoly such as a gas pipeline or electricity transmission line must be strictly and transparently regulated. That's why we have this regulator, the Energy Regulating Commission. So this is what we'd like to see. Fourth, every Thai citizen, this also includes the industry people and industry concerns, they have to have the sound knowledge on energy and uses energy wisely, as Thailand still depends on imported energy source. This is obviously should be included in the national agenda for creating self-sufficiency and also knowledge for energy usage. Dr. Piyaswat talked about the energy conservation. That is something that we have cooperated with the Ministry of Energy, and we have done a number of projects to enhance the energy efficiency of the industrial sector. And but as Dr. Piyaswat said, that all that has been put on hold. I wouldn't say stop, but it was put on hold right now. Okay. The next item is the development of all types of energy, including renewable energy such as biogas or waste to energy, and conventional energy such as coal or nuclear. I was one of the advocator of the nuclear power during about 7 or 8 years ago, prior to the Fukushima incident. So at that time, I was traveling around the country trying to pacify the panic or the fear about the nuclear power. And the other reason that I joined this movement is because I believe also in the global warming trend. Some people may not believe that, but I fully believe that it's man-made and it should be reversed. So nuclear energy is one of the options that can be explored. So coal or nuclear is something that may have to go hand in hand, because for coal, of course, you emit quite a lot of carbon dioxide, but to balance it out, you need the nuclear power as well. The alternatives must not be blocked by ignorance or false belief. Right now, there's a lot of false belief and false information, especially in the social media. So that is something that I think should be corrected. Lastly, the energy planning and decision must be made by knowledgeable people who understand energy with the country's long-term benefit as a goal and without political interference. Why do I have a beef about politicians or political? Because I believe that in Thailand, politicians still look ahead. Their horizon is still in the next election. So for their benefits, for their actions, or for their decision, the next milestone is the next election. And for energy, you cannot do that. For energy, your decision will affect much more than the 4-year horizon period in the political arena or political circle. So that's why I try to put in my 2 bits opinion that for the country's benefit and for long-term development of power industry in Thailand, best should be the decision should be made by knowledgeable people and maybe some academics, because I think it's more scientific than political. Okay, and that's the end of my presentation. I hope it creates some points for discussion later on. Thank you.
I'm sure it does. Thank you very much. And finally, to take us from a little bit of a bird's eye, for a little bit of a bird's eye view of the energy situation, going to look at it from more of a regional aspect, we have Peter Dupont. Please welcome Peter.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about energy efficiency and expand on some points that Dr. Biaswat made. I have to begin this by telling a story about a colleague of mine who works on mostly dirty energy. He works on oil and gas, and he does a little bit of biofuels. And I sent him the brochure with 4 of us and my title, Energy Efficiency. And he said, I hope you have fun riding your bicycle all the way down there and sweating a lot, right? So if that's what people think about energy efficiency, that's a totally misguided idea. That's energy conservation. And I'm going to talk about the 5% of megawatts power that is we are using now in Thailand, even though we don't know it. 5% of the electricity that we're using is electricity that didn't have to be produced because Thailand had a policy called demand-side management. So first of all, I'm going to just show you at our lab at Nexent, we are really interested in fireflies. We go down to Amphawa, which is the firefly capital of the world, and we've been trying to make them more efficient. So this one on the left uses about 75% less energy. So we had patented this, we started selling it, and then we found out about LEDs. So this really screwed up our plan. So we're going to have to go back and make an LED firefly. So next time I talk to you, I'll bring you up to speed on that. Nexent is a global consulting company. We're a spinoff of Bechtel. We do consulting and sell software that operates grids. We sell software for utilities, and we do consulting across the energy value chain. So three main parts of my talk. I'm going to go very quickly over some of the high-level aspects of energy future in Asia, at least the way I see it. Then I'm going to talk about the simple economics of energy efficiency, which is why is that $20 bill on the ground and nobody's picking it up? And then I'm going to talk about Thailand's energy conservation power plants. So the first thing you see here in, I have to pick a side. Okay, so you see in 2010 was the first year that global, right here, global energy use in developing countries exceeded energy use in developed countries. Now, why is that important? Because industrialized countries, developed countries, were the ones who emitted so much carbon dioxide into the air and were causing the problem. But now we're pretty much all in the same boat. China passed the US as the biggest global emitter in 2008. And now you saw with the agreement last week between China and the US, countries are starting to work together. It's no longer, there's still the us versus them in the climate debate, but that's starting to go away. Now, is income, GDP per capita, a determinant of how much energy you use? Well, on average it is, but you see Japan and the US, for example, have approximately the same per capita income. Japan uses half as much energy. Yes, part of that is due to structural reasons, and it's a smaller country, but a lot of that is due to the efficiency in the economy and in products, appliances, and buildings. You can see that at the low end too. So as Dr. Tuarat said, you don't have to have energy use coupled to economic growth. Third point is, where I come from, United States uses a lot of energy. We have, if you haven't noticed, we have very big people who have very big portions. When I go back to the United States, my wife and I have to split a platter, and we still can't eat the whole thing. I mean, it's just, having lived over here for 25 years, I get amazed every time I go back. So we use, on average, about 7 or 8 tons of energy per person. Countries like Thailand, India, China are more in the range of about 1 or 2. You have the industrializing countries such as Taiwan and Korea, and even Japan is somewhere in the middle. So what is a sustainable future? It's going to be somewhere in there, 2.5, 3, 3.5, okay? So the US has to come way down, and as these economies in Asia develop, they have become more efficient. Okay, so can I wave a magic wand and say that by 2030, 70% of the energy use is going to be renewable? I'd like to, but I would be fooling you. This is based on national plans, and you can see the energy use in 2030. This is all of the new energy that's going to come online between 2008 and 2030. It's almost entirely fossil fuel, okay, with nuclear in there, okay? So a shift towards renewable energy and energy efficiency has to be a massive shift. And you're not going to be able to turn off these coal power plants or gas power plants for at least 5, 10, 15 years, especially in developing Asia. Next point is that nuclear renaissance is not yet happening. I'm not sure that it will happen. So there's 2 lines here. One is the share of electricity, global electricity production that is nuclear. Okay, and it's gone down. It was about 17%. It's gone down over the last few years to about 10%. Okay, the bars represent the total installed capacity of nuclear power plants. Now that has gone down over the last couple of years because Germany closed down its 8 plants, and Japan has temporarily stopped its nuclear plants, and they're going to start them back up. But nuclear power will not be a major part of the answer in terms of a large increase in the share of electricity produced by nuclear. That's my prediction based on the trends. That could change. Okay, this is a point that I think Dr. Tuarat had, which is shown in a different way. It's that all of the countries in Southeast Asia, developing Asia, are importing most of their oil. So you have even a country like Indonesia, which until 2007 would have been on the left side of this line. In other words, they would have been a net oil exporter. They were part of OPEC. Now is importing about 25% of its oil. And on average, in developing Asia, about 80% of oil will be imported by 2030, and most of that is going to come from the Persian Gulf. This is based on sort of business as usual trends. So a key point here is that the reason that people like Dr. Twarat, Dr. Piasawat, and other policymakers in Asia and ASEAN are interested in energy efficiency is not so much because of climate change, it's more because of energy security. And I remember you saying that 10 years ago, and I think it's still true, although the equation is changing a little bit because climate change is becoming more and more important. But the real issue is the energy security, the fact, as Dr. Twarat said, that Thailand is importing 57% of its energy right now. So there's a $20 bill and a $100 bill. This represents money on the ground that's not being picked up, okay? And what I mean by that, a very simple example. If you do an energy efficiency retrofit in a factory, you can get an internal rate of return of 25, 30% easily. Okay, if you build a renewable energy power plant, you can get a return of 12%, 15%, 20%, even with the subsidy. So why are these opportunities not being picked up more quickly? Okay, so IEA did a global scenario, and the point of what I'm about to show is that this is a win-win. This is a no-lose proposition. Under the business as usual scenario, by 2050, greenhouse gas emissions will grow by 60%, and energy demand will grow by 70%. Okay, only a slight decoupling, only 6 out of 7. Under the 2 degree, everybody know what 2 degrees stands for? Yeah. Okay. I give you the 3rd degree. It's the 2 degrees of heat, of increase in temperature, which is what experts think will allow us to sort of survive on the planet without everybody being totally flooded. We'll only be partially flooded. So that's what the 2 degree scenario is. Under the 2 degree scenario, we have to invest a lot of money, okay? And the greenhouse gas emissions will be cut by more than 50%. Demand will increase only 25%. So that's a big difference. Okay, how much will that cost? Well, the answer is it will cost $44 trillion. My gosh, do you have that much money? Do you have that much money? $44 trillion? 44 baht. Yeah, 44 baht. Okay, but the savings are $115 trillion. Think about that. Okay, now, why is this not happening? Well, I think the basic answer is that you need policy, because you have millions of individual people who are sitting in their houses, who are lazy, who are not good energy consumers, who don't really know about this, and they'll have to make decisions in their best interest, even though they don't know about that $20 bill. Okay, so I'm going to end up with Thailand's conservation power plants. Now, what is a conservation power plant? I should ask my former intern, Tom, what's a conservation power plant?
It's a power plant that employs energy efficiency measures, or is the one with the interchange?
Yeah, we have to keep working on that. So it is a power plant made up of energy efficiency. So what does that mean? Instead of building a power plant, you have lots of efficient stuff. And I'll go over how Thailand has done this. So Thailand has built, have you been over to Nonthaburi, IGAT's headquarters? There's a big CFL there. Have you seen that? It's like big right on the side of the, anyway, this is the plant at IGAT's headquarters, and they're expanding that, which is fine. I mean, it's actually a pretty clean plant. But I put the CFL, the compact fluorescent lamp, to represent a 500 megawatts worth of power that is negative watts. In other words, it's power that does not have to be produced because appliances are more efficient. So Thailand has built 7 of them, okay? And as I said earlier, 5% of the electricity we're using today is electricity that we don't have to produce because we have more efficient stuff, okay? So how did they do this? Well, they went from fat tubes to thin tubes, okay? You have very glamorous movie stars, I think IGAT was really a genius at marketing this. And so the interesting thing about these tubes is when I was working with Dr. Biaswat, And I used to work, by the way, with Dr. Tuarat's dad, so I must be like 70 years old. But we were talking about going from T12 fat tubes to T8 thin tubes, okay? They're now at T5, and now they're making LEDs. So a fixture, a 4-foot fixture that used to have 50 watts, 40 watts for the lamp and 10 watts for the ballast, now uses about 26 or 28 watts, okay? Now, some of that would have happened automatically over time, but a lot of it happened because of EGAT's policies to promote this and work with the manufacturers. So even though Dr. Biasawat, Thailand has not had MEPS, the minimum energy performance standards, they have done labeling, and most of the savings, the 3,500 megawatts, has come from labeling. A voluntary measure is not mandatory. Think how much more they could have gotten if they actually started ratcheting up and making it a mandatory standard. They could have saved a lot more on air conditioners and other products. But they, Thailand is exemplary in the region for this. And I gave a talk in Taiwan a couple of weeks ago. And Taiwan's policy, the guy got up and did the exact same talk as I'm giving. Right? They did the exact same thing, the exact same product. So I think that's very cool that Thailand is on a par with Taiwan, which is quite a developed country. It's not a country, it's an economy, by the way. Okay, so lighting, if you look at the megawatt numbers here, 500 megawatts is approximately 1 coal power plant. So 2 of the power plants have been saved by lighting, 1.5 through efficient refrigerators, 3 from air conditioners, etc. Okay? Now, how much does this cost? Again, it doesn't cost anything. Now, I sound like some slick salesman, right? It doesn't cost anything. I got a used car I can sell you. It's true, it doesn't cost anything, because look at the numbers here. These are numbers from the US. Coal, solar, nuclear, these are ranges of cost in cents per kilowatt hour. Energy efficiency costs about 2 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour, which is less than the avoided cost in the US. How much does it cost in Thailand? Okay, the red line is the range in Thailand. Thailand's cost of saved energy from energy efficiency is about the same as in the US. It's a little bit lower because they've done a lot of promotion. They didn't have to give as many incentives, okay? And it's far less than the avoided cost. Now, my last slide is the provocative one. So I gotta explain this, set it up. I'm sorry, it took more than 10 minutes. So I won't be able to answer any questions afterwards. Okay, so the red line is, this is fascinating. The red line is electricity use per person in the United States. The red in the United States. And the blue line is California. So about 1975, in between the 2 oil crises, California started doing something different. They started using energy more efficiently. Okay? Now, is this because they're hippies, because they don't shave their underarm hair, because they eat granola, because they ride bicycles? Well, not really, because look, before then, it was the same. The average of California was about the same. So right now, the average person in California uses about 40% less electricity than the average American, okay? And the reason is standards, minimum energy performance standards, the most sophisticated and strict building code in the country, and energy conservation programs, like the ones that have been shut down here in temporarily paused here in Thailand, okay? So this is my challenge to Thailand. Can Thailand become the California of ASEAN? I think Thailand can. If you start benchmarking Thailand versus Malaysia and the other countries, I'd like to see Thailand in 15 years be, on average, 30% better. And so that's the way I will end. And there's lots of money to be picked up. It's not just dollars, baht as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of food for thought there, and I think it's interesting the consistency of the message that comes across here. Thailand is going to be facing, it is already facing a bit of an energy deficit, and it's going to be facing a serious deficit here with what you say 2035, which is not that far away, and the steps that have been taken somewhat haltingly to correct that need to be readdressed. I think there was a consensus on that by everyone here. So with that, I'll open the floor to ask you to ask questions. Yes, indeed. Chris, can we get the microphone here, please? Chris is the agent provocateur, by the way.
Not really. I noticed that our last two speakers did mention the word nuclear more than once. Our first two speakers virtually avoided it, except I think Dr. Piasawat skated across it with the idea that it wasn't acceptable to the Thai people. But surely we should be putting a lot more emphasis on nuclear power, and we shouldn't be afraid that the technologies that went wrong were older technologies and that newer technologies could be a resolution, because although I hear what you say about sun power and having all our land covered with these solar energy plants, but would not nuclear be an important solution? But following on from that, how can we develop a public relations policy or affairs policy that would convince the Thai people that nuclear could be an answer?
Okay, is that addressed to anyone in particular? Was it Peter? Or?
I think the two who didn't mention nuclear.
Oh, okay.
I completely agree with you that nuclear is an option, and we cannot rule out nuclear. And I'm not sure if I agree with Peter that nuclear renaissance is not here. Actually, it had started, and then it was stalled by Fukushima. Now it's coming back, because at the moment you have 71 nuclear power plants are under construction around the world. The number has gone up since Fukushima, and even in US you have 4 plants, I believe, which are now under construction. United Arab Emirates, 2 plants under construction. That is the country with the 7th largest petroleum reserves in the world. So they sell their petroleum to countries like Thailand, where we have so many NGOs running around and cannot build nuclear power plants, and they can build nuclear power plants to supply their electricity. We need to keep nuclear option open, but unfortunately, as Kun Jen said, politicians only look at the short term. With nuclear, you need a continuous preparation and government policy continuously for 15 years. You need to train people. You need to have to set up regulatory bodies. You need to set up safety standards and so on. Now, who in his right mind would spend his time studying nuclear technology at Chulalongkorn University or elsewhere when he is not sure if he will be able to find work in nuclear or not? It has happened before to people of the generation of my father back in the 70s, when they had spent time studying nuclear, and then we didn't build nuclear power plant. So the government policy has to be clear, and I believe that we should keep that as an option. Vietnam will be building nuclear power plants, and it's just across the border, not very far from Thailand. And I really do not have much faith in Vietnamese engineers. I have a lot more faith in Thai engineers than Vietnamese engineers. But before trying to explain this to the general public, let us explain to the general public first about the situation here in Thailand, about oil and gas. Let's get some of the policies moving. The 21st round of concession bidding, let us succeed in renewing or whatever it is that you wanted to do with your extension of the concession, which will expire in the Gulf of Thailand first. If we cannot even convince the general public that petroleum doesn't come from magma, then forget about nuclear.
Did you have a second part to that? Did you? Okay, sorry. Okay, fine.
First, but I'd also like to sort of judge how Thai public opinion might be moved in the right direction. But first of all, perhaps the Ministry.
Well, thanks. I guess it's a good question, and I do agree with Dr. Biasot mentioned that we should keep the all option open, and that exactly is our strategy. We are open up for new technology. We are open up for new resources and any possibility of supply interconnection in the future. We do believe that the Vietnam two nuclear power plants in the future could be a good test bed of not only technological issues, but would be about the social issues in ASEAN as well. I do believe that, well, the two Vietnamese power reactor is not the first one. We had one that never been working in the Philippines. But I guess the Philippines also revising their plans to keep their option open as well. But to your questions about how can we do educational programs to push the policy forward, I do agree that the continuous campaign and put more emphasis on education, not only at the the nuclear physics has been taught in grade 12, but actually something like this probably need to be tailored and need to be communicated at the very beginning of the early stage of their educational career. For example, I guess kids should know about where energy comes from, and the strategy that the Ministry of Energy is doing right now is exactly that, try to put more emphasis on the educational program, try to do a strategy like kids teach kids program, kind of a friendly competitions, brings the energy needs for the country closer to the kids. But I guess in the future, think about games and social media and interactive programs or computer programs could be help a lot. I don't have a silver bullet answer, but I guess we need to do more educational programs in the future as well.
Did you get your question about policy? You had something about policy you were talking about as well, right? No? Okay. And Peter, did you want to take issue with the nuclear thing? Because I think you had a little bit different perspective.
No, I'm not going to take on this fight. But no, I just say that for nuclear to work in Thailand, the government will have to provide guarantees and be fully behind it, and maybe have it done by a government, by EGAT or a new company that does this. Because the reason that nuclear plants have not been built in the States for many years is because of financing. And several utilities that were planning on doing financing nuclear power looked at around the world and at some of the cost overruns, which are quite common, and worried about, in the old days, if you said, I'm going to build a nuclear power plant, it will cost $1 billion, and it ended up costing $4 billion, it's no problem. You pass it on to the ratepayer. Those days are gone. So that's my main caution, is that the financing has to be in place, and it has to be government guaranteed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Do you have the mic? Okay.
Sawadee-ka. Good evening. My name is Robert Kinnear with Alternative Innovations. I do conceptual design. My background is a civil engineer, but I worked in the oil and gas, designing oil wells and managing an oil company for a while. But I'm also a water engineer in developing countries. And I'm very involved in environmental and climate change issues. Each of you four speakers made very relevant points one by one, which I'm not going into because I only can select one. But you talked about sustainable energy and environmentally friendly, renewable energy. Why not solar power? Why not water power? Water was never mentioned by any except the first speaker when it was 47% was imported, and it was mentioned in the last speaker's, not mentioned but noted on a graph as being almost minimal. Planning decision by knowledgeable people. This is a very good point that I'd pick up. And last speaker regarding policy. Hydro is very small. I have a design based on the flooding that took place here. So this is actually bringing together lots of different strands of national policy, not just what we're talking about here today. I created a conceptual design called National Flood Prevention System. National because it has to be centrally controlled by government, not bits and pieces all over the place. And the fact, which basically it's regarding putting in retention reservoirs throughout the river system, not dams, but retention reservoirs, not just in the main rivers, but in all the small tributaries. The thinking behind it is quite elementary. If you let the water come down the mountain to the floodplain, it will flood. If you don't let the water come down to the floodplain, it won't flood. It's quite basic in concept. I noticed that the Water Department in the Bangkok Post today is talking about their 48 small projects, apologies for pronunciation, the Sakai Krang River Basin versus the Mae Wong Dam. Their 48 smaller projects are equal to the one big dam. My conceptual design, I call it megapixels rather than mega project versus megapixel. The more pixels you have, the better the picture. Therefore, the more retention reservoirs you have, the better the program. So I won't go into great detail, but basically it's retention reservoir takes the water out of the system because which is basically dealing with a flooding problem, but because the water is there, you can then put in small micro hydropowers. Because the hydropower is there, you can put in pumping and irrigation systems, so you can send it back to the farmer to get second, third crop. So you're generating electricity, preventing flooding. You're creating, instead of mega project, which takes 5, 10 years to design and 10, 15 years to build, and climate change has overrun the project anyway. These are projects that knowledge is available right now through hydrological and many departments I know from various other conferences I've been to. It's available here in Thailand already, but it's not integrated. So you provide infrastructure regionally. I actually spoke to Yingluck and Plodpersop about this. I thought this was there, whether you agree politically or not, with what they were the right government to implement a project which would be helping the farmers.
Okay, I'm sorry, is there a question in there, or?
Well, why don't you use a national flood prevention system as I've just outlined?
Okay, all right. Is that addressed to any particular panelist, or?
Well, they each have a contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I could say a few words because I guess we at the ministry also prepare to work closely with the irrigation department or people in charge on the national irrigation plan or water anti-flooding plans. But we are not able to quantify the specific location to put on the hydro projects. But I do believe that we have a potential, but it's not a megawatt size, it's not a big dam site. It has to be a smaller types of project. At the moment we, even though that we are not, the government is not ready to release the national anti-flooding or national water plan as yet. The Ministry of Energy continuously working in a small hydropower, but mostly in the hill types, in the mountain area. We have, my departments alone have more than 200 projects. It's a sub-kilowatt types. It could range from 3 to 5 to 200 kilowatts types. It's a small project with high head sometimes, and some of them are very good, very successful, and we be able to transfer some of the asset to be managed by the local area as well. So I guess in case of Thailand, we are not that bad in terms of hydropower. Well, comparing to the totals potentials, the percentage may be low, but I guess we tried the most we can, not in the mainstream of the river, but we try to keep, or we try to get every small project, bit and pieces, wherever we can go in. But in the past 2 decades, I guess the environmental activists has been advocating the strategy of protectionism of some of the areas. So we are not able to be implemented. For example, there are certain rules and law that prohibit a power plant in the protected area. So it's not prohibited for us to go in and put on the turbines. ภาษาไทยนะมันมีใบอนุญาตบางประเภทที่ห้ามสร้างโรงไฟฟ้านะครับในเขตพื้นที่
It seems to me like 25, 30 years ago there were dams going up everywhere for electricity.
That is what I've been doing since I left the government, building small micro hydroelectric dams, 20 kilowatt, 30 kilowatt. And again, the problem is with the government permits. Getting permits are extremely difficult. We've just completed one in Chiang Mai. The irrigation dam is already there, so you just put in 30 kilowatt turbine. Again, the Ministry of Industry decided that that was a factory. So it had to be moved from one location to another location, etc., etc., and then you also run into all sort of other problems with the permits. That is something the government can do, I think, can streamline the permitting process, and also maybe provide incentive for the private sector to implement small micro hydro projects or mini hydro projects in existing irrigation dams or in areas where there are no impacts on the environment. There are potentials, I think, but again, the number is not 1,000 megawatt. We are talking about 300 megawatt, maybe, if you can build them. The other thing which I'm disappointed is that the DEDE's budget hasn't really gone up much, because DEDE is the only organization in Thailand which had been concentrating on small hydroelectric dams. They had been constrained by the budget. The Ministry of Energy's budget is actually by far the smallest among the ministries. It's less than 3,000 million baht, is that right, per year? 2,000 million baht. Tiny compared with what we are spending on teachers, education, welfare for the teachers.
Excellent. Any other comments from Peter? Okay. Yes, indeed. Sure.
My name is Peter van Zanten. I used to be an economic advisor at the Netherlands Embassy. Even organized a seminar several years ago with Dr. Trairat. Maybe you remember. I have a question about privatization, or creating actually more competition in the energy sector, and whether that would help perhaps becoming more efficient as well. I'm just looking here at a website in the Netherlands, and every household can actually choose from 16 different energy providers to provide electricity. You can go for green, you can go for solar, for a wind, whatever you like. And the price is different, and you can actually set up what time of the day would you use most energy. Some people will do it in the evening when they are all home, others maybe are washing, things like that. In Thailand you can select that also if you're in the industry, I think, or a big user, but a small user, I have a house here in Thailand. I have no option. I can only go to the MEA, and they provide electricity at a fixed fee, and there is no negotiation possible at all. What is the view, I would think, from Dr. Trairat, and maybe also from Dr. Piasawat, about privatization and opening the energy sector more to other private investors?
Completely agree with you. Can't agree more with you. Privatization, deregulation of the energy sector, allow retail competition, set up power market, etc., etc. But unfortunately, the general public here in Thailand would like to nationalize everything which has been privatized, and they would like to see monopoly. So that's why things are not moving. And maybe Kun Jain, since he is a member of the National Reform Council, can expand on that. Maybe actually I would like to know if the council will be pushing for deregulation of the energy sector.
Unfortunately, I don't belong to that subcommittee, but obviously we've been pushing for this for a long time. Actually, the first step that we asked for is the third-party access on the national grid, because without the third-party access, there's no way for a deal between the supplier and the user of the electricity. So that has been promised to us by the regulator, but they have not delivered on their promise. We have a new set of members of the regulators, and we met them about a month ago, and we mentioned that, and they said that it's coming along, and it has been like that for a long time. I don't know what their time frame for coming along is by their meaning, but that is obviously something that we push for. We would like to see things like that, and we have currently a number of solar farms available and put up all over Thailand, and there are a number of industry who would like to get their hands on clean energy, because they have to sell their products to certain countries where they give certain incentives or some handicap for companies or for suppliers who use renewable energy, and that is still not possible in Thailand. So that is something that we're really trying to push. Yes.
So I'd like to just respond. It's a little bit of a divergence, but it's a story about an IPP called NRG. And so this IPP was taken over by a new CEO about 10 years ago. It was practically bankrupt. They have 135 power plants now with 53,000 megawatts, so almost twice as much as is produced in Thailand. So when this gentleman took over the company, he started making it more efficient. It's now a Fortune 250 company. And in the last 10 years, the carbon footprint of it's an IPP, so they basically, it's a private company that produces power and sells it into markets where they can compete. So their carbon footprint has been reduced 40%. Let me say that again. It's a utility that makes power, and they've been increasing their power production, and their carbon footprint has decreased by 40%. Now, further, the plan is by 2030 to decrease it a further 50%, and by 2050 by 90%. So is this guy insane or what? So the reason he is doing this is because he sees the future. Carbon will be regulated, it will be taxed, and he's not going to get out of generation and sell his plants and go, make furniture or something. He's going to be selling clean power. What he's been doing, he's tried investing in nuclear, and he spent $300 million, and they ran into regulatory issues, so they stopped that. But he's been investing in gas. He's going to invest in clean coal, advanced coal with carbon capture and storage. So that's, if you envision instead of, an EGAT as the big dominant player and a couple of EGCO, if you envision the possibility of having multiple providers who can compete, as you said, in a more transparent system, the future could look like that. The future does look like that. I mean, this is an amazing story. That's why I just told it.
Well, I would add just a few comments that probably the privatization is not yet on the radar screen at the policy levels. But I do agree that the deregulations and liberalization and create a level platform for more competition is our intention. Our intention is to make sure there's a competition wherever it is decided to. For example, at the moment we try to create a better or a more transparent competition in the oil markets, including the diversifications of a certain shares that PTTs holds in the refineries, and to make sure that there's a retail competitions at the there's a pricing competition at the retail market. So the government try very hard to intervene in the retail price of oil as few occasions as possible. Okay. So we try to exit the practice that we have been doing in the past 5 years. Okay. And the competition could go next step and the gas market, gas and power. Okay. As introduction of the third-party access regime on natural gas pipeline would be a good start, and probably next step is a liberalization on the opening up for a better competition for the natural gas supply option, for example, the LNG facility in the future. So I guess some of this could create more competitions arenas. But privatization, deregulations of the power industry market, it needs some time, right? It needs some time. Yeah, it needs some time. By the way, I remember จำได้ครับผม โรงแรมอามารีใช่ไหมฮะ somewhere in the เพชรบุรี ตัดใหม่ road.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We have a question from the back there.
Right. I just want to ask. I think you guys all know about the shale gas coming out from the U.S. It's some kind of new energies that the U.S. are using it, and it reflects on the oil price as well as the oil and gas market. Do you think that this new balance of oil price and also will impact Thailand as well, or will Thailand have any potential to find this kind of new resources in Thailand?
We have about shale gas in Thailand. I'm not an expert, but I have been told by some good friends who are geologists and expert in this. We have shale, but the shale deposits in Thailand are totally different from the shale deposit in the state or in Pennsylvania. The shale deposits in Thailand are freshwater shales, so the deposits are more condensed. There are not much porosity, so there is a little chance or less chance to have a gas that could be seep in a shale fracture. This is totally different from in Pennsylvania, that the deposit of the shale in that area are saltwater shale, okay. And good chance that it could have some porosity and the gas could be seep in that shale, and there's tremendous potential in that area because the shale in that areas are very wide and very thick. We used to do this is about shale and potential of shale gas. Now I move to the technology of hydraulic fracturing, or what has been known as fracking in the States. We have been using hydraulic fracturing in Thailand for many years, but not in the shale deposit. We use that technology in some sand deposit to explode using the hydraulics to explode in the dense sand area in some of the oil and gas, conventional oil and gas reservoir. So we've been doing some field research about shale, and we've been familiar with the hydraulic fracturing technology, even though it's not widely used in our country. About the potentials of Thailand could get any benefits from shale gas bonanza in the States. I hope so. If the United States could allow more exportation with a non-FTA country like us, and let the market decide wherever the resource should go, and let the bar down a bit, then Thailand would be benefit from that bonanza.
Okay, next we have a way in the back that can. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Over here first, and then over there. Okay. Yes.
Hello, hello. Yeah, I have a question about, you mentioned about by Professor Peter about California, and about how Thailand can potentially be California in the future. Since California is like a country, state in the United States that can be very successful in implementing energy efficiency, programs. It has been successful for the last 40 years. My question to you is why cannot other states, duplicate the success that California has had for the past 40 years?
Actually, if you plotted 50 lines, you would see that some lines are closer to California. When you plot the average, it is about 40% higher. If you plot Texas, it would be well above the US average. So it depends on the state. So you have a few states, there's probably a handful, maybe 5, 6, New York, Massachusetts, the Pacific Northwest, that are close. But California is probably, I would say, like 10 to 20% ahead of those states because they started earlier. They had the first state standard for refrigerators, and that was just radical. I mean, this whole idea of a negawatt, you could replace a power plant by having efficient refrigerators. And what happened is after about 5 or 6 years, other states started passing MEPS, minimum energy performance standards, and then the manufacturer said, enough, we give up. We'll have a national standard. So they had a national standard. Building codes. California, as I said, is more advanced than other states. And it's, it's something, there is something different about California. I've lived there. They try things, they're early adopters. You have all these people in Hollywood. You have in the north, who are very environmentally sensitive. In the north, you have a slightly different, less glitzy type of person, but they are environmental advocates as well. So before 1975, probably that was latent in their character, but it wasn't being manifested because it didn't matter. Oil was really cheap. So I think they've taken on the policy challenge. Now, the good thing about the United States is that you have 50 states which are national laboratories. I mean, the federal policy on energy until recently has been really awful. And it's a mishmash. And so most of the progress has been at the state level through programs and building codes and utility incentive programs and opening up the market to different power producers. And California just happens to be the best. There's probably 4 or 5 others who would be close. And then there's a lot of others who are really much worse and would be above that line. Yeah, there's a show called Californication. Maybe because they're doing that, I won't say the word again, they're using less energy. Not watching TV or something.
Okay, fine. Thank you. We have a question over here now. Do you have a mic?
Thank you for the session today. I understand this energy security is important. However, getting more and more important today is climate change, like polar vortex and the impact happened to U.S. recent year. I just wonder if Thailand have any study on what's the impact from the climate change to the Thai economic and the energy industry in general. What have we started preparing for anything? Do we have any policy coming up, things like that?
Well, I guess we have studies, and then the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment also has a master plan, and we work as a Ministry of Energy. We work closely with them to make sure that we have what we call a NAMA plan, or a National Mitigated, whatever it is.
Nationally appropriate mitigation.
Nationally appropriate.
National. Okay, we have a NAMA plan, which is an action-oriented type for energy sector, and we're the only one that has been working with them and produce a good result. The result is this: if we could proceed or implementing our energy efficiency plan, as well as a renewable energy development plan, as we said so, we would be able to reduce the emissions or carbon equivalent emissions from 7% to 20%. It depends on the amount of investment that we could put forward. So I guess even though that the energy sector has been classified or has been pinpointed that we are the most polluter or the biggest emitter of carbon to the atmosphere in this country, but we are the most advanced to work closely with them to make sure that we have all the information needed to calculate all those emissions that need to be mitigated.
To add something, as I sit on the board of the TGO, the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization, the TGO is an implementing agency, working under the policy guidance of the SOPO. What's the SOPO? What? No. SOPO. The policy environment policy office, so they have been active in doing the implementation. But the biggest obstacle, the biggest problem was the reduction of the price of carbon emission, the greenhouse gas during the past several years. It has gone down from, say, about $20 to $25 per ton to about $2 to $3 per ton. That is the biggest obstacle. And right now they're working on what we call the voluntary program, to the Thailand Voluntary Emission Reduction. And we have made some networks with a number of agencies overseas, for example, Japan. And we have some very good examples. And for example, they came up with this standard, standards for energy consumption in buildings, for example. And the way they do it is that they keep obtaining information, data on energy consumption for a number of years, without saying that they're going to go to the mandatory schemes. But after a few years, when they have a very clear pattern of how that building is using energy, they slap in the mandatory measures, and that really works. and I think the DEDE probably has to do the same. You have to you have to get, before you go to mandatory, you have to get a good idea of how the plant or the building is using energy, and when you slap in the mandatory scheme, they won't have they cannot refuse, because you already have their patterns already.
Well, I guess we are modifying our mandatory scheme as well at DEDE, and there would be extra columns to make sure that they could not only table up what they plan to do, but what they are implementing, and how can that calculate into or transform into the emission reduction that could be done by energy efficiency measures in the industry and in the buildings.
So I have an idea for your reform committee, which is to make sure that the language that comes out of it has minimum energy performance standards for equipment, and then also these standards we're talking about for carbon. And I just wanted to share something which shocked me. I just read it yesterday in Bloomberg Business Week, and this was shocking because Exxon is not a real friend of they've been actually fighting against many efforts to act on climate change. And I found out that since 2007, Exxon has been using a shadow price for carbon in its internal planning. Now, what does that mean? That means that when Exxon plans future projects, they impute they assume that there'll be a price by 2030 of about $60 or $70 per ton. Now we're talking about this really, really, really imperfect market where it's just crazy. It's like $2 a ton now. So what does that mean? That means when they're looking at a pipeline, they're going to look at how the economics would be affected. If it's an inefficient pipeline, if it takes a lot of energy to sort of get it out of the ground, and if it doesn't pass the $60, they will basically do prioritization, and they will focus on the projects that are less carbon intensive. And that's very similar to this utility NRG that I mentioned earlier. So the one thing I can say is that we don't know what the future will be. I mean, who would have thought 5 years ago that solar would be at grid parity or less than the avoided cost? Nobody. I mean, no one predicted that, really. And so things are happening very, very fast. And I am a policy wonk myself, but I don't envy your job, Dr. Twarat, because how do you regulate something that's moving so quickly? The private sector is going to come up with a lot of the solutions, and in this case, this is, to me, a very promising trend that Exxon has actually sees the future will be like this. It will happen.
That's really astounding. It really is, because they're funding so many of these or climate change activities. They're funding anti-climate change activities and propaganda, and if you want to call it that. Yes, okay.
So I have a question that when I've listened to the presentation today around energy strategy, one issue of decoupling, so that you have utility or energy producer that on the one hand is tasked with trying to reduce energy through energy efficiency, and at the same time needing and having the profit motive. So I wonder if that is an issue here, and I know that structurally, like in the US, we deal with that with many different utilities, that central issue of decoupling when it comes to energy efficiency, for example. Different utilities having to provide rebates and incentives in order to continue to exist as a near monopoly. And at the same time, I wonder how that impacts with decentralized solar, which would seem so promising for Thailand. When you look at US companies that have really innovated with leasing models that have allowed and really accelerated the adoption of decentralized solar, it seems such an immense market here for Thailand. but I see a similar issue of utilities having, or a central state-owned utility having to deal with profit motive on the one hand, and on the other, adopting these technologies that would actually reduce their product.
Well, my take on the decoupling first. I have seen some a couple of a good example of decoupling effect of energy consumption versus economic expansion. One country is Denmark, another country is Germany. But they do it differently. They're doing this differently. Denmark through probably a high price strategy. So the electricity price in Denmark is the number one, the most expensive in continent Europe. So that moved some plants out of that country. So Denmark doesn't have much of the energy intensive industry within their country, but they counter with another types of economic expansions, more creative types, more agriculture-based type of industry. So Denmark do it through probably a good pricing signal. Germany differently. Germany do it through efficiency. Germany still have a large petrochemicals or chemical plants, but they emphasize the improvement of efficiency on the large energy consumers. They be able to make sure that the achievement of energy efficiency goals of those large industry could exceed the growth of the total demands of the country, to make sure that it could be offset. So these are two good examples. I don't know Thailand which way could be better suited for us, but probably somewhere in between, that we need to send some good signal that there are some kind of industry that probably we probably don't need, or but we also need to emphasize on efficiency to the large consumers. We used to have a discussion that, kind of industry that probably Thailand needs to keep to make sure that we are good, we still maintain our competitiveness. Some of those still energy intensive. For example, the tourism industry. Tourism industry would mean you create more demand from tourists who come and consume your energy within your country. But the creations of the GDP or the value adding for the economies are much higher. So that out of that discussion, we think the tourist industry, even though it consumes a lot of energy, is still one of the industry that Thailand needs to keep. But we need to send a good signal to the hotels operator and tourist-related industry to make sure that they achieve a certain energy efficiency targets, to make sure that they are reducing their demands or keep their demands in check. That's my take about the decoupling, but I guess about the solar decentralized and leasing program is probably on the way. We have some good example. We've seen some good example. We have some good study, and I don't know. Probably within the future that we could see more government policy on the leasing programs to make sure that decentralized solar could be part of the solution in the future.
Yes, Peter?
So I want to just separate the response on decoupling of GDP and energy use as opposed to decoupling of utilities revenues and sales. sales of electricity. So the first thing is that why would you let the fox guard the hen house? Why would you let a utility be in charge of an energy conservation program? It makes no sense at all. I blame that all on Dr. Piasawat, who requested the first DSM plan back in 1990, and yeah. No, actually, there is. So I'll just say briefly, as sort of a primer. You can do substantial national level energy efficiency programs through the government, like DEDE, Department of Alternative Energy Development and Efficiency, through a utility, or through a new agency that you set up as an energy efficiency agency. So different countries do different ways. Even in the US, all three models are used. The biggest model in the US is the utility model, because utilities know the customers. Utilities have access to the customers, they have access to data. It makes a lot of sense if you get the incentive right. And that's why you have to do all sorts of backflips to get the incentives right for utilities, and they haven't done that properly in Thailand. The Energy Regulatory Commission has the statutory authority to set a tariff mechanism to fund DSM and to require the utilities to do DSM, EGAT, PA, and MEA, but they have not chosen to use that authority. I would venture that the 7 conservation power plants, what it works out to is that they're saving, EGAT's saving about 300 megawatts a year, 250, 300 megawatts a year. If they had a robust program, it would be 700 or 800, which would be as high as anywhere in the world, because they would be doing building codes, they would be doing minimum energy performance standards, they would be doing programs with hotels, they could be a lot more proactive. Still, they're getting a fair amount just doing simple things like labeling. And I agree with you. I mean, this was a point that was raised earlier, is that you have to get those incentives right, or you're not going to have a really robust efficiency program.
Dr. Piasawat, as the unindicted owner of a rooftop solar installation, do you have any comments on that?
Probably no further comment, except that just want to repeat that there are so many obstacles put up by the government which have to be removed. Then you can see a lot more progress on solar energy, solar rooftop, wind energy, waste to energy, and even energy efficiency. You know, the programs which have been terminated or put on hold, I don't know, but they shouldn't have been put on hold in the first place. You really need to get them moving as quickly as possible, because it had totally stalled any effort to improve energy efficiency in Thailand. And DEDE, you know, DEDE has a lot of information. DEDE has been collected data on designated facilities, which is facility using more than 1 megawatt of power. Since 1995, enormous amount of information which DEDE refuses to disclose to anyone. Very valuable information. You can disclose that, deleting the names of the facilities. And researchers, experts, and the ESCO companies can analyze them and then recommend programs for energy efficiency. DED shouldn't be trying to analyze the data by themselves. It's too much work. Allow access to this information, and also in the Energy Conservation Act, there is already a clause which will allow penalty for not abiding by the standards. So now that you have information, you know what industry can achieve if they are not abiding by certain good practice. After a while, you can simply slap on the penalty. It hasn't been done yet since 1995, unfortunately.
Thank you. There was a question over here. Yes, Anthony, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Anthony Watanabe. I've arrived here in Bangkok just 3 months ago with a company called Asia Clean Innovations. And I'm really enjoying the discussion. I've learned a lot this evening. These are complex issues, and at the risk of maybe complexifying a little bit further, I'm wondering if on the one hand, we're talking about energy, and the Deputy Permanent Secretary has laid out some of the 4 policy frameworks. On the other hand, we've heard the Prime Minister talk about Thailand's digital economy and being a leader in the digital economy in the region. In other parts of the world, we're seeing, with the proliferation of mobile technology, apps, the Internet of Things, those worlds actually combining, where apps and applications on mobile units are being used to help drive awareness of energy use. Behavioral energy efficiency is a term that's being used. And I'm just wondering if there's any agency communication around these 2 things whereby there could be economic development, job creation, innovation on the digital economy side in Thailand that, by the way, has maybe very good energy benefits and then could be certainly exportable in the region. So I'm curious to know if that's something that's come up at some of the policy discussions. Thank you.
Well, very limited. But there are people from the States and from Singapore come and discuss with me with many ideas about combining digital economies and energy policy. Like one of the closest thing that I could think about is about smart grid and about using big data that utilities are collecting. The American company called O Power, I met in Singapore. They come and make a presentations that if they could dig up the information from the ratepayer, from the household electricity bill payer, they could make many things, many graphs, many charts that could communicate with the consumers that this is in the territory that they have to save more energy, for example. And I myself direct one programs in a small town in Koh Samui. Samui is one of the finest tourist destinations in Thailand. We try to set up a program called Green Room in the hotels. The Green Room is simple, a digital equipment that measures the electricity consumption within the hotel room. The idea is when the guests check in and request for this green room, they would give the allocations of the certain amount of electricity that the guest can consume for a night, for one night. If they consume less, they're entitled for a discount. So this is kind of incentive program. Utilizing digital equipment could be big for tourists and tourism industry in Thailand. So we retrofit five hotels, volunteer hotels, in different types of rooms, a standard room, pool villa, and others. And we probably try to do a pilot program within the next few months from now. One of the hotels that I have a good relationship with is Intercontinental in Samui. Has 2 or 3 rooms that retrofitted with this green room technology. And probably we try to do good programs within the next few months. A digital economy in the smart grid could complement to the current policy on renewable energy as well. As another good gentleman that mentioned about decentralized solar programs, I do believe that if Thailand has advancement about the smart grid, about the electronics and digital equipment. We be able to put it up together in one certain policy, especially in the energy policy. We probably could be a leading country in ASEAN as well. That's my comments.
Anyone else have a comment on it? No? Okay. We have another question from the back there. Is that okay?
Hello. Can I have some more questions about the solar rooftop and decentralized solar farm that Dr. Biaswat mentioned before? How about another idea, because the solar rooftop have many obstacles? How about make the program that the farmer who has a land and then not used to do any agriculture that can build the small size of solar farm and sell the electronics? Do you think this idea is good or bad, or any obstacle about the idea?
No, you run into the same obstacle. The obstacle is here. So you just get rid of the obstacles at the ministry. That's all. The farmers don't have to build solar farms. Solar farmers can put solar cell on their rooftop and sell power. It's all to do with regulations, process of obtaining permits from various organizations. Do you know that if you have a solar farm at the moment, and there are lots of solar farms around the country, in Thailand we are producing about 1,200 megawatt at least from solar farms. And do you know that if you want to get the utility to read your meter in time so that you will get payment within 15 days after the end of the month, you need to provide additional incentive. Otherwise, they wouldn't come to read the meter and you wouldn't be able to get your payment. This is the sort of thing which I find totally ridiculous. It's within the power of the government and the regulator to correct all these and remove all the obstacles. If you put up solar rooftop and you want to sell power to the grid, you need to get permits from about different departments within the MEA or PEA electric utility. Someone will have to come and check your system, and then another department will have to come to check the meter, etc., etc. So it's within the power of the government, regulator, to remove all the obstacles.
So can I just come to Dr. Twarat's defense? I think you're giving him a raw deal. He may be part of the solution, not part of the problem. How long have you been the Deputy Permanent Secretary? Like 2 months?
No, like 2 weeks.
Yeah, there you go. So now you have your marching orders. Right? Actually, I have a related question. I noticed, when the solar rooftop policy was announced, I was very excited, and then my wife called up MEA, and it was like blah 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 blah. It's way too complicated, right? So I noticed that HomePro, I think it's HomePro, is advertising that you can go to HomePro and basically they'll take care of it for you. Do you know about this program? Because that way of doing it, of facilitating a one-stop shop, and basically, because I'd love to just go to HomePro this weekend and say, put this on top of my house. Can I do that? Does it work? Is it possible?
I don't know, but that's what they do in Japan. You can go to a lot of these offices and then you get everything installed. All the permits will be done within, let's say, 2 months, everything installed. In my case, I'm just trying to test the system. So I didn't run around, lobby the utilities. Let's see how long it will take to get permit for synchronization. If I do nothing, so I'm still waiting for it.
I'd like to add one more ridiculous story. There's a school who decided to build a solar panel on the lawn, not the roof, on the lawn of the school. And they went to the regulators, because now the permit is given by the regulators for solar roof. And regulators said, no, this is on the lawn, it's not on the roof, so they can't give the permit. You have to go back to the Department of Industrial Works because it's something more than 5 kilowatts or something of electricity involved. And they went to the Department of Industrial Works. And the Department of Industrial Works says, no, they cannot give a permit because it is a school. And no industrial plants is allowed to build in schools. Now what do you do?
Only suggestion is you put the panels high enough to make sure that it would be called a rooftop. And you sidestep the measures. Well, I don't have any other solution, but I solicit myself that I have learned many things, that there are barriers that put up by the government, but well, some within my ministry, and there are a lot more beyond my ministry. For example, we talk about the obstruction from the Factory Acts. Obstructions about the Factory Act would be related about to the Town Planning Act, which permits industry out of the zone of residential that include schools and temples. So there are many things to be done, I would guess. Well, I can only offer you 2 possible options that could get rid of this. You erase the deputy out of my title, and then move MEA and PEA within my ministry, and then it could be done. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, please.
Well, my name is Soon Kao Chansin. I'm working as advisor for GROW, which is the private power company. And GROW is making IPP, SPP. And actually, the private power industry happened by the initiative of Dr. Biaswat about 20 years ago. And looking back, I must say that my personal impression is that Thailand has come quite far when we talk about the privatization. We could have gone much further should Dr. Biaswat got, let's say, support for his total idea of the power pool and all that kinds of thing they're saying about the third party access and so on. Well, we talk about the future, and we talk about long term, lots of things about long term. So my question is that should Dr. Biaswat, let's say, become the minister, or let's say, what would you recommend to the to the present government, which has already 1 year or more or less time to do, to change, to make sure that we got secure energy for the future?
Actually, all the proposals, recommendations are within the proposal of the Energy Reform for Sustainability group, ERS. We have compiled a set of recommendations, and there are probably about 100 proposals with their names attached to the proposal, including Dr. Twarat and Kun Jain. So we are all from ERS, and I think everything there can be done within 1 year. Price reform, more concession on ENP, negotiation with Cambodia, and conclude the deal, make decision on the extension or whatever of the concessions which will expire, remove all obstacles to EE and RE, provide appropriate incentives, etc., etc. It's ridiculous to be subsidizing renewable energy to offset the subsidy you are providing on fossil fuels. You don't actually need any subsidy on renewable energy now. I think if the prices of fossil fuels are correct. Diversification away from gas, coal. I think we need more coal-fired power plants, but again at appropriate location. We need more transparency, governance of the energy sector, etc. Everything I think can be done within 1 year.
Very optimistic. We have time for maybe one more question, if anybody has one. Yes, does somebody? Okay, please.
I would like to ask one question. As in Africa, they have a problem of food shortage, but our country doesn't have the problem of food shortage, but we are afraid of energy shortage. So we have to focus on energy efficiency and low consumption of energy. But if in the future we can have excessive energy production, and we don't have the problem of greenhouse gas emission or climate change problem, do you still have to concern on energy efficiency or low energy consumption, or we will just promote energy consumption as it would be one of the component of domestic consumption, the component of GDP that reflect the growth of the economic? That's my point. Or we still have to make some balance between consumption and production, or we don't have to concern about it?
I think I understand the question. So in the future, if we become energy sustainable, maybe we don't need to worry about the demand side. Well, let me put it this way. You always have to worry about the demand side, because unless there's fusion, and you have fusion reactors at a very low cost and can produce, you have some magic energy source, like the movie The Saint. I don't know if you ever saw that movie. It was a great movie, by the way, where they're fighting over this new energy source, which is like basically unlimited. If that's not the case, and it's not likely to be the case, then you always have to worry about the demand side, because if you don't, and you just don't pay attention to how much energy you use, you have to produce more energy, which means more resources, even if it's from renewable fuels. So, I mean, this is one of the key things for anybody who is involved in off-grid work, where you're setting up mini grids and houses. You have to have the equipment energy efficient. Otherwise, you have to double the size of the panel to service the house. So I think you always need to pay attention to the demand side, no matter what the energy source is.
Especially for industries, because for industries is your cost, and no matter what you do in a free competition economy, you have to minimize your costs anyway. So you have to work for the minimum consumption of energy.
Okay. We'll ask our MC, our lovely MC, to come up.
So a big thanks to all the honored panelists for a wonderful discussion today. Please give them a round of applause. And finally, I'd like to invite Alex to give a little gift to each panelist of appreciation, and also